A documentary that screened recently at the Melbourne Documentary Film Festival is a film called The Posh and the Riff, all about St Kilda, my hometown. And it's my great pleasure to be speaking to the director of The Posh and the Riff, Marianne Latham. Marianne, welcome to Movie Metropolis.
Thanks so much, Peter.
Great to talk to you, and I really loved watching this documentary because I've lived in St Kilda all my life, and
Wow. Yeah.
yeah, and the background and history of St Kilda, some of which I knew, but a lot of it I didn't, and so congratulations on the research that you put into this film.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, well, I mean, everything was a revelation to me too. I mean, I've lived here for over 40 years, but I'd read a book, I don't know if you've heard of it, by Anne Longmire, called The Show Must Go On. And I think it's a history of St Kilda, but only to about like mid last century. And when I read that book, I went, gosh, I live in an interesting place. It's how could you ever possibly put all of that in a documentary?
Well,
But
you've
I
certainly
was going
done
to say,
that.
well, I haven't put everything in, but I've done my best.
You have. So it must have taken you quite a bit of time to find the archival material, do the interviews, all that sort of thing.
Yeah, well, I mean, the trouble is, this was a very much a budget documentary. I couldn't get any of the film bodies interested. I think it's like, St Kilda, where's that? If I had said Bondi or King's Cross, we could have been okay. But well, probably that's my fault for not getting it over as an interesting enough story, more than just about somebody's suburb. Yeah, so the main problem always was, I mean, getting people to talk about St Kilda. There was just so many more I could have spoken to, but of course, every day of filming is more dollars. And even though I film myself, a lot of the interviews were I had a camera, a cinematographer, professional cinematographer do. The other thing is the archival footage. I would have used heaps more if I had the money. Every second you go, ding, another $50, another $50.
Yeah.
You're just looking at every second with archival footage. So I would have loved to have used more.
I get that from so many documentary filmmakers that it is so expensive to get access to
Mm.
archival material, which seems ridiculous when you think about it.
Well, I mean, NFSA are terrific. I've got a terrific relationship with the people that work there. They're really, really excellent. But I mean, they're hamstrung because they don't have enough budget to digitize everything. I mean, you can go onto like the library, US Library of Congress, and find stuff there and download it in broadcast quality for free.
Mm.
I mean, I know things cost money and not everything can be free. I kind of see that archival footage shouldn't be owned by, Getty's or whoever, that it should be, it's our history and we should own that footage and be able to use it. For instance, the bit with the American soldiers in it, that was originally, as you could tell, it's a propaganda movie. Oh, didn't we all get on well with those American soldiers when they were here? As we know, that was not the truth. But that I got from the museum in Canberra, the War Museum in Canberra. But originally would have been some American government department would have made it. And for that, I mean, I think I used about 20 seconds, and that was $2,000 just for that.
Ooh,
So
wow.
that's what, and even you think like our television stations, all the commercial stations, ABC is always difficult to find stuff anyway. And yeah, it's so expensive. But unfortunately for my sins, I love anything with archival footage in it. It's yeah, I love it, but it's expensive. Yeah.
It is. It is. Well,
Mm.
congratulations on what you have put into the documentary. So the story is so interesting about how St Kilda was a place for the rich and for the elite, and then it transformed into quite a poor sort of place. I mean, that transition
Mm.
of that suburb is so interesting. The way you've documented that.
Well, I mean, you live in St Kilda, you just see the remnants of those mansions, or you see Eildon is still standing and Linden is still standing. But I had no idea really until I met Carmel Mackenzie, who wrote a book on St Kilda that this year got the best history book in Victoria from the Historical Society. So, it's a really well-researched book. And talking to Carmel, I found out that, well, she claims that it wasn't just the richest people in Melbourne, it was the richest people basically in the world that lived in St Kilda. Because I mean, there's a whole gold rush thing. They didn't make money out of gold. They made money out of, liquor, cartage, tobacco, tea. And at that stage, I think Melbourne and Chicago were considered per capita the wealthiest people in the world. And the wealthiest people in Melbourne lived in St Kilda. This is before Toorak. So they all lived in St Kilda. Yeah, I had no idea. I think it's fascinating. But then, as you say, when the 1890s depression happened and the cable car came in, so poor people, the riffraff could come to St Kilda. The rich people no longer wanted to be here. They abandoned those mansions. They turned them into shoddy boarding houses. Not all of them. Some of them were made into, good boarding houses. But yeah, the whole thing. By the next depression in the 1930s, it was like, this was just like hell on earth. It was
Mm.
really dreadful. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, such an interesting story. And being a beachside suburb and having such iconography as Luna Park and the Palais and so on made it quite an attractive place.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, to begin with, before, when the Alec Willam were living here, before the white people arrived, I mean, it was a beautiful hill, beautiful beaches, not that far from a river. And, it was an ideal place to live. So no wonder the rich people wanted to live here. And of course, they had the added bonus that they were far enough away from Melbourne. Because we're talking about, I think Shanks Pony back in those days. So, um, that they could keep the riffraff out. They had it all to themselves, this beautiful place. Yeah. And then of course, when the riffraff did start here and they started getting entertainment for them, including, Luna Park in 1912 and the dance halls, the Palais de Dance and all of that, it's sort of be like, why wouldn't you come to St Kilda? It was, the beach, parties, music. Yeah. Which I suppose it did go back to being that again in the 70s, but in a slightly different way. Yeah.
Yeah, and of course
Mm.
Saint Moritz, which I have some memories of, which
Oh, yes.
and
Yeah. St. Moritz. And that's so many people talk about, that's where they met, oh, their parents met or their grandparents
yeah.
met. It's St. Moritz. And then they go over to Luna Park and yeah, St. Moritz, which of course that was knocked down for a rather shabby kind of hotel, which has now been knocked down again for luxury apartments. So
Yep.
be really interesting to be able to see in the future and see whether that gets knocked down and they end up putting an open air skating rink in there or something. It's the way these things happen cyclically, it's really
Yeah.
amazing. The suburb could be that rich, that poor, and now it's definitely creeping back up again.
Yes, yes. And I know the
Good problem.
controversy that surrounded the Palais and the triangle development that was supposed to happen there in terms of car parks and tearing down buildings and all that sort of thing. The history of the place is just so fascinating.
Yeah. And Lizette Atkins kindly let me use footage from her documentary, which she made on the triangle. And, that was an amazing thing because there's always been so many action groups in St Kilda,
Mm,
fighting for not to have the SB about 25 stories high or whatever, and then the Mandalay apartments, and then there was the Triangle. But with and they didn't always agree with each other, these different groups, these disparate groups. But for the Triangle, they all came together to fight what they called Chadstone by the Sea. And when you see the pictures of what it was going, I mean, mind you, it's still just a car park.
mm.
There's nothing there. But what would be wrong with planting some lawn and some flower beds and putting a lovely little pagoda up like in the
Mm.
the other gardens? It's yeah, but it's not that thing, somebody's got to make a buck out of it somewhere, or somebody thinks they should be making a buck out of it. And what they've got designed for at the moment, Unchain, are fighting against that because they say it's just a big block.
Yes.
It's very unattractive.
Yes, exactly right. Wow.
Mm.
So in constructing your story, which is largely chronological, which is fascinating, what decisions did you have to make about what to include, what to leave out in the final 1 hour edit?
Well, as a documentary maker, there's the one thing, it's vision, 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 like you can have fantastic stories that people tell you, and you can get away with, as I have, with lots of stills from the State Library and old drawings, the old um, Thomas Gill drawings. But in the end, you have to be able to show it visually. Now, we all know that Ken Burns did the Civil War in a lot of his early documentaries with lots of stills,
Mm.
and did it brilliantly. But all his later ones had fantastic, like footage in them. Yeah, so a lot of it would be, if I couldn't find footage for it, well, then I'd have to let. And there were so many stories. There were so many stories anyway. Um, but I was trying to follow that trajectory of when I found out how wealthy the people were in St Kilda, like what happened. And the shot I loved best of all, and the cameraman Noel Jones took me to see it many, many years ago. He said, "Have you seen this block of orange flats like this?" He said, "Have a look at this." Drove up the back of it, and there's a mansion. I think that's my favourite shot in the whole documentary. The mansion still sitting there, and the irony that now we do have heritage overlays, they can't get rid of it if they want to.
Mm.
But it's things like that. What happened? The fact of all those orange flats turned it into flatland. How did that happen? What was the legislation that came through that allowed the developers to do that? It was those sort of interesting stories, looking at the circle of the story of St Kilda, that I was interested in. And I was very aware of, look, I love Mercamora, and I did do a documentary on Mercamora years ago, but instead of doing on Merca again, I used Anthony Breslin. And instead of using, it's always Paul Kelly and St Kilda, and that's been done a lot. I've included the painting of him, but I went to Paulie Stewart instead of, to be my musician. So I try to steer away from what's been done before, I guess, and
Yes,
tell
yes.
a story. I tell a story that maybe a lot of people didn't know about St Kilda.
Yes, well, certainly, as I said, I learned a fair bit, which, even though I've lived here for so long, so well done on that. And having the narration, I think, adds a fair bit to the documentary.
Right. Yeah. Well, look, I mean, in a lot of stuff that I do, I worked for the Sunday program for Channel 9 for a long time, and I'd go out and do all the interviews and just make the interviewees tell the story through their voices and not do a voiceover. But with this, it kind of needed something to string it all together. It wasn't going to work because there were so many stories and so many different stories. I think it needed that linking voiceover to kind of make it cohesive as a story. So yeah, and I've done voiceovers in the past, so I'm cheap. So it was me. I would have liked to have, like hired somebody with maybe more dulcet tones than mine, but it was the way I decided to tell the story. Yeah.
Yes, yes. No, well done on that. Well, the film screened at the Melbourne Documentary Film Festival and was quite successful because it's such an
Yeah.
important history.
Well, they put it was a last minute thing. Um, they contacted me and I was like, yeah, maybe, yeah. Put it in. They immediately took it on, and it was sold out within days. So they put on an extra section. And then last Sunday was supposed to be the original session, and lots of people were saying we can't get tickets. And when I turned up to the Nova Cinema, they'd opened up two cinemas instead of
Ah,
one. So they could put twice the amount of people in there, which was good. But a lot of people have been saying around here, have been saying, are you going to show it somewhere in St Kilda? So it's going to be shown at the library sometime in October, I think. But
yeah.
maybe I'll try and get it on at the Alex or the Astor or the Palais, some not the Palais, but some a local venue, so
Mm.
St Kilda people can see it. And the St Kilda Historical Society want to help me do that.
Oh, excellent. And is there a prospect of international film festivals, perhaps, for your film?
Look, I've in the first time when I put it up on Film Freeway, which you have to enter festivals, I had a few people say, look, if you enter it, it's definitely in. And so I did enter it in a few, and I'm really curious about it because I got in everything that I put it in, it got in. And in Rome, I got the best feature documentary,
Ah,
but I'd never ever sent them a copy of it without a copyright watermark on it.
ah,
So I'm a bit curious about all these film festivals. I mean, I
ah,
know the Melbourne Documentary Film Festival is legit and is fantastic and was really, really good. But some of these, I think they have like monthly festivals and they put them on the net for 5 minutes and then they take them off again.
ah.
I'm really curious as to which ones are legitimate and which ones aren't.
That's a
Because you
good
have to pay
point.
to enter, of course. You have to pay
Yes,
to enter.
yes, yes.
So, and there's not much way, even though I won the Rome best feature documentary, that's all I heard from them. They didn't send me anything in the mail. There was no check in the mail for me. You just do it for the pleasure of having it, your laurel. They send you a laurel that you can stick on your poster.
Yes, yes, yes.
So I could send it off to all of these and get a million laurels on my poster, but I don't know what that means really. Does
No,
anybody actually see them? I think it'd be really worth somebody looking into it. Hmm.
that's a
In
good
fact,
point.
I don't know if you know John Doggett Williams. He's a Melbourne filmmaker.
Oh, yes.
He's doing a PhD at the moment on pathways to markets for independent filmmakers,
Ah,
which I think is really timely
okay.
for documentary makers. Yeah. Because of course everybody's a documentary maker now because we've all got phones and,
And there
and
are other outlets too, like Doc Play, I think, and there's some
yes.
Foxtel has a documentary channel and so on.
Well, I guess because it is a $10,000 movie, and that came from the Council of Port Phillip,
Yeah.
through the St Kilda Historical Society. As you know, you don't make that much of a documentary for $10,000.
Mm.
Um, so I didn't do any sound sweetening or color grading or anything like that. I had to do that all myself. Film Victoria have promised if I get a broadcaster, they would give me funding to do all of that. But it's sort of
Ah.
like what comes first, the chicken or the egg. So, as it is, I don't know whether it would be acceptable or not. I do come from a broadcast television background,
Mm.
so I'm not just being coy. Um, it probably needs a bit more influx of funds in it to bring it up to a proper sound balancing and sound check and all of that.
Yeah.
But definitely down the line, it was great having on at the Nova three times. That was great. They were fantastic. And now I'll do it in St Kilda. And yeah, the next step is I'll see if either, Doc Play, ABC, SBS want it, and see if I can maybe get a little bit more funding to finesse it a little bit more.
Sure, sure. Well, hopefully that
Yeah.
will happen because it deserves to be seen more broadly, because
Thank
it is
you.
such a
Thank you.
fascinating
Mm.
history. As you've mentioned, your background in broadcast television, you're a journalist, and you've been involved in so many productions. Tell me about your background in the industry.
Well, I started out as doing a cadetship in the Channel 7, HSV 7 newsroom back in the
Ah,
70s. And back in those days, they didn't put on cadets. You had to do your cadetship in a newspaper and then transfer over to television. But they were looking for a cadet, and I went like, take me, take me. So I worked there for 7 years, working as a news reporter, and on there were different shows called what was it? There was one on a Sunday after the news, like a magazine, Sunday magazine
ah,
program. So I worked on longer forms. Then after that, then I had my daughter. So I worked for the CSIRO film unit. We made broadcast documentaries, and I worked for Channel 9 for about 25 years in news for the Today Show and mainly for the Sunday program. So I was producing a lot of programs for the Sunday program. But then, of
ah,
course, like all good things, it came to an end.
mm,
So I went freelance, and my first freelance documentary was about the Ballet Russe tours of Australia
ah,
back in the 1930s. I did that with the Australian Ballet, and
mm,
that was fantastic. I got money from Screen Australia to do it. Um, so that was fantastic, and I thought, oh wow, this is easy. I'll make some more documentaries, not realizing how difficult it would be.
yes.
So I do lots of films like I've got half a dozen films with Bloomsbury Publishing in London for the education market. I
Ah,
do it for the education market, and for websites. I do all the filming for the Fellowship for Indigenous Leadership and different things. But yeah, my broadcast television days sort of ended with the end of the Sunday program on Channel 9.
uh-huh.
But, great there. That's where working with terrific camera operators and terrific editors. Um, I didn't ever think I could do it myself, but with digital cameras and digital editing, and I thought I just sort of picked the brains. I've still got mates from like Noel Jones and Craig Hardiman, crews that I used to work with before. Who I'm always ringing them. How do I do this? How do I do that? But I've learnt excellence through those people, and I'm trying to do it myself and try to get to their standard. But I'm not. But the thing is that being a broadcast producer, I know what the standard is,
Hmm.
even though I can't physically always reach that standard myself.
Oh, well, you did a
I
great
just
job.
keep I just keep buying new cameras, hoping the cameras will do the work for me. Which of course they do to a certain. I just bought a little Sony 4K camera, and it's just lovely. Just press a button and off you go.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, the technology is incredible now, the way it's
Technology,
improved.
it's
Yeah.
just amazing. Like years ago when I first started, there's no way you could do this by yourself. I mean, the cameras were at least 30 grand, and that was just the camera before you went for lights and
Mm,
sound and everything else. Yeah, so the technology has made it possible for people like me to be able to, film your own and edit your own documentary, and even the graphics that you can do. Like I use Final Cut Pro, and you can pull in your own titles, put fancy graphics on it, and I actually love doing it too. It's fantastic.
yeah, yeah. Do you have any
Mm.
particular documentaries or documentary filmmakers who you look up to?
Well, of course, like I mentioned Ken Burns before, and I should remember the woman that he does them with, being a feminist, but I can't remember her name. But I think they make there's always that thing with documentary makers of those who just want to document things as they happen, like fly on the wall, and the
Mm.
more structured ones, I like some of both. Like I think some of Errol Morris's
Ah.
documentaries are amazing. And there's one that I did several years ago, and it was somebody talking about the story of their father who was on LSD experiments during the war. You might remember it. He was being experimented on, and he ended up throwing himself out of a hotel window. And his son was trying to say it was because of the, the US Army experiments that caused his father to do this. And it was done. Errol Morris shot this interview with the son, and he was the main interview in it. I think he was the only interview with it, and did it with about 16 cameras and just intershot it.
Yep.
Another one he did was the Fog of War,
Yep.
which again, I think, who was it? Oh, I've forgotten the name of the politician now. He was the Minister for Defence.
Yeah.
Anyway, that again was just, there wasn't a whole lot of interviews. It was just like the one interview, but really interestingly shot. So yeah, I look to, those great filmmakers. And I'm trying to think now, I should say, well, of course, Lizette Atkins has made some terrific ones, and Sharon Prentice, who is my EP on the ballet documentary, she's put out some great documentaries. Yeah, so there's been some terrific Australian ones. I think we've got a pretty good record of documentary making in this country.
We do. Are you planning perhaps to make another one?
Well, I'm working at the moment on one which is a spin-off from Anthony Breslin, the artist that was in the St Kilda documentary. He was asked to do a mural at McKinnon Secondary School here, and they asked me if I would document it, which I've
Ah,
done. It's just a 15-minute documentary. And because of that, Bloomsbury Publishing in London want me to do a longer piece, which will be for the education department on Anthony. I'm also looking at a documentary on an artist that was born in Castlemaine and nobody's heard of, called Martin Lewis, who he is credited with basically inspiring Edward Hopper, the great American artist, with his
ah,
style of work. And a friend of mine, Brian Dorr, who's come back to live in Australia now, introduced me to this artist. And I went, the stuff, you'd love it. It's all done in the 40s, etchings, and it's just beautiful. And he had such an impact on art in America. And he's only now people are beginning to discover him, and his art is starting to, get money now that there's no use to him because he's dead. But we're looking at the possibilities of doing a story on Martin Lewis at the
okay.
moment. But
Great.
there's always a million ideas floating around there.
And that's great to hear because I really enjoyed the Posh and the Riff Raff. And just on that, is there a website people can follow so they can find out where they can see the film?
No, but thank you for prompting me. I do have a website which is lathamfilms.com.au. And I will get onto that straight away because it's sort of had its showings now. I've just been putting it on Facebook, basically. I've got a Latham Films Facebook, and then put it on Risk and the other St Kilda sites for St Kilda people to see what's happening with it. But yeah, I will. I'll put it on my website, and hopefully there'll be some news in the future of somewhere else it's going to be seen.
That would be great. I think the film deserves to be seen by a broader
Oh, thank you,
audience.
Peter. Thanks for your encouragement, because
Yeah.
you work, when you're a sole filmmaker, you work by yourself,
Yep.
hunched over, and you ask your best friend or your husband, what do you think? And they go, oh, it's fabulous. Oh, it's fabulous. You go like, that's not what I wanted. I wanted some, some proper criticism. So yeah, we all work by ourselves a lot, and it's always nice when you get good feedback.
Absolutely. No, I was very impressed. We've been speaking to Marianne Latham, the director of the documentary The Posh and the Riff Raff. Marianne, thank you so much for talking with me.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you, Peter.
All the best. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.